So we will stay with Ford now, but move back to the issue around workers' rights and a just transition. And we'll be handing over to Aaron Acosta, who's a program director at Investor Advocates for Social Justice, where he leads work on human rights in the value chain, racial justice and immigrants' rights, and peace and demilitarization.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to present. So I'm Aaron Acosta. I'm a program director at IASJ, and we are a nonprofit organization that represents faith-based investors to push companies to respect human rights, climate justice, racial equity, and the common good. So on behalf of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace, last fall we filed a shareholder proposal at Ford. And then similar to Sarah's presentation, our proposal at Ford is also asking the company to adopt and disclose a non-interference policy, committing to uphold freedom of association and collective bargaining, both in its operations, but also to use its best efforts to extend this to its joint venture plans, which I'll talk about in a bit. So unfortunately, similar to Sarah's case, the Ford proposal was also challenged by Ford, and we have received a result. The SEC unfortunately ruled to exclude our proposal, but really I'm here today just to kind of explain that these real life concerns regarding union busting that I'll talk about and negative impacts on local communities persist. And so as representatives of responsible investors, we see shareholder proposals as one tool to push companies to respect human rights, but when that tool is taken away, we continue to engage the company on these issues, including trying to exert public pressure when our concerns are being ignored by the company. So for companies, we believe that cutting corners by permitting anti-union practices and ignoring affected stakeholders' concerns may bring about short-term savings, but really in the mid and long term, they usually carry significant material risks that negatively impact long-term shareholder value. So just to give you a brief kind of background of the issues of concern, we as an NGO carry out our due diligence in representing our investors by consulting with affected stakeholders when there are indications that portfolio companies are not complying with their international obligations to respect human rights. And we work to elevate those voices to the company of those impacted stakeholders. So through consultations with these impacted stakeholders, we became aware of reports of severe violations of freedom of association and collective bargaining, as well as negative community impacts. And these are related to Ford's joint venture with Korean company SKON. The joint venture is called Blue Oval SK. So Blue Oval SK is currently constructing 3 battery plants in the South, 2 in Kentucky and 1 in Tennessee. Ford received a $9.6 billion grant from the Department of Energy, making this Ford's largest manufacturing investment ever during its 118-year-old history. And then it's going to be one of the largest factory outlays in the world. During the 2023 negotiations between the United Auto Workers and the big 3 automakers, Stellantis and General Motors both extended their contracts to include their joint venture battery plans, but Ford did not. Ford resisted. So I will give a few examples of how the situation on the ground is playing out right now. And I'm not able to go into a lot of detail for the time, but just as a starting point. So in Kentucky, Blue Oval has launched an anti-union campaign. So we've been able to obtain flyers from some of the workers that they received. And just to read you one line from the flyer, it says, "Join the majority of employees already assigned to the plant who do not want a union by voting no in the upcoming election." We've also been informed of at least 5 different open cases at the NLRB that are linked to supposed retaliatory firings. And then if you go on to Blue Oval SK's website, you'll see it's dedicated basically to discouraging workers from unionizing. On January 7th, a supermajority of employees at the Kentucky plant filed a petition with the NLRB to hold a union election, but apparently this has been held up by Blue Oval litigating the matter. And then just to go into some details about the Tennessee location, there's a local community near the site of the battery plant, and they're called Blue Oval Good Neighbors. They are a coalition of impacted West Tennesseans and allied organizations who have been calling on Ford since 2022 to come to the table to negotiate a legally binding community benefits agreement to ensure that the majority Black agricultural communities of the region share in the benefits of development. But Ford has not met with them. Blue Oval Good Neighbors believe that without this community benefits agreement that's legally binding, the new battery plant will worsen the already existing racial economic divide in the region, contribute to environmental harms, and increase the cost of housing and living. Among their list of key demands, the group is asking for local hiring, workforce development, and union neutrality. So although Blue Oval SK is a separate legal entity from Ford, Ford is still obligated to use its leverage and influence to ensure its joint ventures respect the freedom of association and collective bargaining. So I'm going to leave us all with a call to action. And despite our repeated attempts to bring this issue to Ford's attention, the company has consistently claimed ignorance or not even responded to our specific questions. Ultimately, Ford challenged our proposal and was successful, but the material risks still exist and will become even more severe if the company continues to ignore investors and affected stakeholders such as communities. So to Ford, really, we urge the company to meet with Blue Oval Good Neighbors to negotiate that with them in good faith, to publicly commit to neutrality and non-interference regarding any efforts to unionize at the Blue Oval plants, to use its influence and leverage to ensure Blue Oval itself similarly commits to neutrality and non-interference, and then to investigate and effectively address all allegations and instances of anti-union activity taking place at the Blue Oval plants. And finally, to investors, I call on all of you to use your voices when you're engaging Ford and urging them to implement these demands. So I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A, but I'll pass it back to you, Chris.